Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are watching it. I always feel like that intro deserves like a bigger voice than I've got. Yeah, but you get the British guy today. Thank you for joining this webinar today. You are on a HiddenLayer webinar. We're going to be talking today about a taxonomy we've been creating around adversarial prompt engineering. Hopefully, you saw the blog last week. You may have been and played around with the site. But yeah, we're gonna dive into a few different things today around that topic, why we did it in the first place, kind of how it's structured, how you can interact with the taxonomy itself, some of the ways which we've used it, but by no means is that a prescriptive way of using it. And then if you do want to contribute, we'll get into that later on. As we go throughout this, I'm going to be your moderator for the day. I am Jim Simpson. I will try and poke questions. I will try and ask questions of the rest of the team as we go throughout this. I might just end up listening to what they got to say because I know these guys and they are very, very intelligent. If you do have any questions or there's anything that I missed, please use the Q&A as we go throughout the session today. We will get to your answers, hopefully towards the end of it. If I'm good at moderating, we'll have around 15 minutes at the end of it. Yeah, we can get into some of the questions that you guys have. So joining me today, we do have some of our illustrious team. First off, from our threat operations team, we've got David Liu and Jack Parker. And then from our research team, we've got Jason Martin. The four of us were heavily involved in this project as we went through it. And I think it's kind of one of the reasons why I feel this taxonomy serves like a lot of different purposes. We have multiple different backgrounds represented in this taxonomy, different ways of thinking about it. And that's kind of what we're going to get into today. Okay, so yeah, we'll get started. First off, I like origin stories. I've been told not to talk about the origin story, so I'm not going to talk about the origin story. If you want to know about that, find me later or at a conference and we can get into that side of things. But we had frustrations, and Jason was the one who kind of most eloquently voiced those frustrations and those observations around kind of the way in which we were structuring things. Following a red team that we'd done at HiddenLayer for one of our clients, Jason put all this together. And it kind of started the seed for what was, I don't know, the next few months worth of work, an awful lot of calls between the four of us and a number of other people inside of HiddenLayer. Time zones have been fun. A massive number of late nights from my side of things, early morning from David and the West Coast side of things. But yeah, we're really excited to get into it. So first off, why did we start doing this? What was the problem that we identified? What was the problem that is wider than HiddenLayer? It's out there. Jason, why don't you take us through it? It was your observations really that crystallized this into something.
Yeah, I think there are other taxonomies out there, right? There are taxonomies like the MITRE Atlas framework, which is a great framework for looking through the life cycle of an application or the life cycle from a security practitioner perspective. There's very useful lists like the OWASP top 10 list that shows you like, hey, these are kind of the top things that you should be looking at or thinking about. What I was trying to do at the time was really be able to map what we were seeing in the prompts that we were looking at or creating ourselves and say, all right, where does this fit in these taxonomies? Where does this fit in terms of providing us coverage? And we'll talk about coverage more later, but I think there's some challenges in that particular use case for a taxonomy that we were struggling with a little bit. For example, a number of the taxonomies kind of place jailbreak and prompt injection as one sort of thing in their taxonomy, and they're really different. And the reason they're different is because they conflate the objective with the technique used to achieve the objective. And that's going to be definitely a theme of this conversation today. But we were having issues because, you look at a prompt, and the prompt was created in an attempt to jailbreak a public chatbot or something like ChatGPT or something like that. And so you look at it and you go, well, this is a jailbreak prompt because that's the objective. It's trying to bypass the alignment of the model and do something like that. But it also is showcasing a number of different techniques, including prompt injection, because of the mechanism that was used to deliver it. And so then where do you put it? You can't really easily put it into that. And that also highlighted the fact that prompt injection was sort of this bucket that like all kinds of stuff got stuck in, because it is a key technique. The idea that you're going to concatenate this like malicious content to the system content, but it didn't really break it down any further than that, and that's why it was represented in a lot of the taxonomies. So that really led to, I'll be honest, a little frustration on my part as we're trying to map stuff out, and the idea of, all right, let's see, what if I could start from scratch, what would it look like specifically for how you'd label prompts, and that was kind of the initiative that started all of this.
Yeah, I think some of the points just to like highlight from that, right? The separation from the objective to how you achieve that objective is it's a huge one that isn't necessarily obvious until you start really spending time like digging around inside of all this. I think we kind of took that idea and there's a group of us internally, and I picked up the document that Jason had been working on. I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I come from an Intel background. Jason mentioned like prompt injection being one big bucket to lump stuff into. Like if you've ever worked in Intel, we love models, we love buckets. We just want to put data into buckets, right? And having one big bucket just doesn't help us. So I really loved this idea, and I was like, cool, can we go and talk about it? And Jason's first reaction was, oh, are people using that? I'm like, yeah. And he was like, well, maybe we need to think about that a bit more. I was like, oh, okay. So it kind of started this whole project that we've been working on. One of the first people I spoke to was a new guy that just joined the company, was David. David's background is in taxonomies, and this was like this sort of chance fate thing where everything was aligning up. So having those conversations with David kind of led us into what the structure might look like. David, do you want to take us away on kind of how we're thinking about this, how we've broken it down, and where the delineations on certain things are, like some of the design objectives we had, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So the taxonomy that we've developed has, kind of four large conceptual buckets, if you will. We've got our objectives, which we have separated from the more traditional TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And we still have the TTPs because, everybody in cybersecurity is already familiar with that. So we didn't want to depart from that kind of structure too far. But the reason for delineating the objectives from the TTPs is that we felt TTPs are something that we can observe in the environment, and we can look at what the tactics, the techniques, and just by observing the procedures, by observing, say, what behavior in our logs, right? Whereas objectives are things that are like in the minds of adversaries or in the minds of red teamers, right? And those things we don't have direct access to. At best, we can infer what they are based on what we do observe from our environment, right? So that's why we wanted to separate those, at least large categories. So we have objectives such as alignment bypass or jailbreak, task redirection, hijacking, context leakage, things like that. These are the objectives. If you can see on Jim's screen here, we have the objectives in the APE website here. And then tactics, techniques, and procedures. These are more of the traditional breakdown of methodology in terms of the behavior, right? So at the very granular level, we have procedures, or rather, in our case, they are prompts. And these are the kind of literal strings that are coming in as input to an LLM, right? From there, we've abstracted out techniques, adversarial techniques. These are things such as using base64 to encode your input so that maybe you're trying to bypass some kind of input filter, as well as other techniques. Look, we've got crop in there, policy puppetry, which is these are HiddenLayer discovered techniques, and then tactics above that are abstractions on the techniques themselves. They kind of group techniques together where the techniques are maybe abusing the same sort of vulnerability or using the same sort of mechanism. So that's roughly how our taxonomy is built, the major parts of the taxonomy.
got to switch back to my video. There we go. Awesome. Yeah, no, I think it wasn't like necessarily as straightforward. Like, it makes so much sense now when you explain it, right? But I can't tell you the length of conversations we've gone on the kind of like how granular we decided to get. Do you want to dig into any more around like, because I know we've got some extra bits in there, like in the technique level where we call out types and annotations and kind of what those mean.
Yeah,
and
we
kind of
looked
the
around.
rationale why we went through that.
Yeah, exactly. So we looked around at other taxonomies or other kind of collections of various prompt engineering or prompt injection techniques, and we saw a wide variety of granularity in terms of the abstraction, right? So some of these classification systems have things like ROT13, base64 encoding, leet speak, all as separate techniques. And those are fairly granular. So we decided to kind of cover all of those as one technique, encrypted encoded input. But we have annotations on our techniques that list out like subtypes. So and we've gone back and forth about whether we want to make subtypes like a real object in the taxonomy, and that's something that a path that we can go down or not. It really depends on how the community is using it, how we end up using it. Again, taxonomies, in the way that I think of taxonomies, and this does, as you mentioned, it goes back to my previous career, which was as a philosopher. I worked on ontologies and taxonomies, and where was I going with this? Yeah, there's this kind of like discussion of like what level of granularity, how many layers of categorization do you want to have? But taxonomies themselves, they're really just, I think of them as regimented languages. I think of them as a certain kind of models or kind of like knowledge base. And there are various ways that you can go with designing a language, and there's no like perfect language, right? So we're not claiming that this taxonomy is better than all the other taxonomies, and we're not claiming that this is how it is. It's set in stone.
Yep.
Languages themselves evolve over time, and so will our taxonomy. Yeah,
I think it kind of gets to the point, like the quote that I love from George Box, like, all models are broken, some are useful. Like the level of granularity we went to in the taxonomy works for what we're trying to do, right? Like the different teams that are using this taxonomy, we're using it as this common language to talk amongst each other. I think like we can pick on some of them. So we have control tokens. So we have this idea of control token manipulation or control token spoofing, right? So you can use specific control tokens that are in a model to try and get a model to do something. And then there was the idea of you can use things that look a little bit like control tokens, but they're not actual control tokens when you're building your prompts. And then I'd be speaking to Jason and he'd call that control token-ish. And I'd speak to someone else and they'd be like, oh, it's when you spoof a control token. And someone else would be call it like fake tokens. And you're like, we need a language amongst ourselves, like internally, to help us with this. And then when you start then going to conferences and you're talking to other people, it's like we don't have that defined lexicon. And we're not saying we're right or anything like that. This is our attempt at it. And if what we need is like a community to form around it, and we'll talk about it later on, like how you can contribute to this project. We genuinely want contributions to it. We are actively asking people to help us out with this. Like, we're going to work on this regardless, but by having other people's input, we might say, actually, that phrase that we used for that thing, maybe it's not as descriptive as it can be. Maybe we've missed a reference somewhere, and we want to give credit where credit's due. Like, this is not us saying we hold all the chips on this, and we really, really do value that. When we get into the contribution section, like how you might use it, do you think subtypes would be a good thing? Because that'd stop me and David arguing for hours about it late at night. Like, it is gone midnight for me and I am still on the phone going, I don't think we need him. David's like, we need him, right? So we need we need a third person to come in and just tell us to show them this is the way to go. So that contribution thing would be really, really helpful.
We want to capture how the community is using these terms and using these concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if the other guys have got anything else around kind of how we've thought about this problem or any of the structure to it. I'm guessing not. No, got a couple of shakes to the heads. I'm going to carry on then. Okay, so we've talked about the why we did it, Jason's frustration, and then kind of how we structured things. Okay, so the cerebral stuff, like what we did. The next bit to really talk about is how we're using it internally. One big thing to say around this is the way we are using it. For anyone who's on the call who maybe like has an Intel background, if you're aware of the Diamond model, when Christopher, Sergio, and Andrew Prendergast, when those guys released the Diamond model, they released it with a 60-page white paper that went along with it, but they didn't really talk about how to use it. They just said, this is it. And they didn't talk about how they used it or the way in which it should be used. It is not a tool. It is not a thing to follow a step by step. This is a way, like David was saying, it's a knowledge base and it's also a language. But how you use that knowledge base and how you use that language will vary. We're going to tell you how we use it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is the be all and end all of it. We would love to hear if other people find any value in this and how they might use it going forward. And yeah, any changes that we can make from that side of things. However, we are going to tell you how we use it just because I'm sure people are going to want a little bit of inspiration. Since Jason's document kind of started off the back of a red team, I'm going to throw this one to Jack. Jack's on our Threat Ops team along with David. Threat Ops team, they do an awful lot of work, but they do an awful lot of red teams. So since it came from there, maybe Jack, you lead us off on that side of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll first just echo what you just said, Jim, which is I'll describe how we've used the taxonomy of adversarial prompt engineering so far on red teaming engagements that involve LLMs. But this is nothing to say that you have to copy this or you have to do exactly what we did. We hope that this taxonomy will be useful however you want to use it if you're an AI red teamer. There are three main ways that we've used this so far on red teaming engagements. David used the term regimented language earlier, and that certainly resonates with how we've been using it internally on the AI red team so far. It's really helpful to have a clarity of language, even just thinking in your own head about the problem that you're working on. Very helpful to have clarity around these concepts and clear language to refer to these concepts to yourself and to your coworkers and to customers. So the regimented language part of it has certainly been helpful, helps us collaborate better, helps us say exactly what we mean and just communicate better in that way. The second way that we've been using it is to help us surface patterns in our own work, our own adversarial prompting. So we will have an application based on a large language model that a customer wants us to red team to perform adversarial prompting against. And we'll do that. We'll try to achieve all of our objectives. And then after a certain amount of time, we'll ask ourselves, okay, well, what tactics and techniques from the taxonomy have we been using here? We'll tag all of our prompts, all of the successful ones. We'll tag all those prompts with tactics and techniques and just ask, okay, what's been working so far? What can we observe about what tactics and techniques have been effective in this particular situation? And that helps us sort of keep a catalog in our head of what to try first next time that we see a similar application. And it might even surface some gaps. Maybe there's a glaring hole and, well, we really haven't covered this or we really haven't used this part of the taxonomy. Maybe it's worth going back and trying to craft some prompts that use those tactics or techniques. So pattern surfacing. And then the third way that we've been using it on the red team is breadth of coverage in terms of objectives. So we want to make sure that we are pursuing all of the objectives that an actual adversary would pursue against a large language model powered application. To provide as much value as possible for our customers. It's really a value add to a customer when you can say we've thought really deeply about all the sorts of objectives that a real world adversary would try against your application, and we have tried to reach all of those objectives ourselves. So it just sort of gives you and the customer peace of mind that you've covered all those possible objectives.
I think that's huge. I'm sure like Jason's up next, and I know breadth is going to be a word that is used a lot. But the breadth of coverage from the objective perspective, I think when you're asked as a customer of a red team, what are you worried about? What do you want us to test? It can be quite a daunting task, right? Like, can you break it? Yes, that will be the answer. Yes, we can break it. Like, how do you want us to break it? What do you want us to try and get out of it? And having the objectives listed in here, by no means is this a complete list of the objectives. There can be more, there will be more, this will grow over time, but at least it's a starting point to say, what are you worried about? Like, if we're testing a chatbot, what are your biggest concerns out of this list of objectives? And then you can start from a consumer's perspective to think about it in terms of risk. Like, if brand damage is the number one concern for your enterprise chatbot, then maybe anything that's going to elicit a damaging response talking about your brand is one of the things that you want to test inside out. Like, how many ways can you get brand damage to be a thing? Like, and so I see your point on this, Jack, and I think having it just as that starter, that mental model of, okay, these are the things we're going to try and achieve, and these are the ways we're going to try and achieve it. Speaking of trying to achieve stuff and the breadth of coverage that way, do you like my segue? It was like a rock. Anyway, Jason, do you want to take us away on the next bit?
Let me receive that pass. Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. I think a big part is trying to understand the breadth of the space that's available to the attackers, right? And when you think about it through the red team engagement sort of perspective, like Jack said, you're going in and you're trying to meet a set of customer agreed upon sort of objectives, and you're going to use, to the best of your ability, the tactics and techniques that are currently known, and try to provide them some feeling of coverage and safety that comes from that. But the other way we're looking at it more from the research side of things is when you look at a taxonomy and you finally see that structure, you see like, hey, we've broken it down into buckets, and under those buckets are lists of things. You start asking like, well, which buckets don't have much stuff in them? And is there more there? And a good example of this would be one of my favorite buckets is the selection of tactics we call lore abuse. I think everyone on this call enjoys that particular category, but lore abuse is actually a bucket we had to create when we started to realize there's more techniques that live under what we thought was a tactic at the time is knowledge return oriented prompting, or CROP. We realize there's other sort of lore abuse, and lore abuse is sort of forming into this category of things that are memorized by the model during training, and then you can abuse that during your red team engagement or as an adversary. And I think that category needs more, right? Like I think if you know how large language models work, fundamentally what they're trained on, the corpus of data that they're pre-training it consists of, it's enormous. And the fact that there's lots of, I guess, ambiguity and nuance, there's all these innuendos in natural language, there's all kinds of like things that you can use to do indirect references, to do all kinds of fun things. And so when you think about it from that perspective, looking across the tactics and asking, okay, which of these tactics are really well fleshed out? I think there's been a lot of work over the past couple of years on things like the encryption and encoding sort of bucket. Not to mention those are techniques that have carried over from like other security domains besides AI, versus the lore abuse and those sort of knowledge-based tactics are greenfield in my mind. They're fresh. They're specific to the body of memorized knowledge and the probabilistic nature of language models. So for researchers, it helps us look at what needs to be fleshed out. And from that, we get more coverage. We can provide Jack and David and anyone on the red team with more ideas to try in the red team engagements. And we can provide our defensive teams more things that they need to look at to be able to catch and understand.
Yeah, I love it. The lore abuse, I think it was definitely another late night call from me, and we were trying to think of the name for it. And lore abuse came up, and I think everyone on the call was like, okay, we should finish the call today. This is a very good point to leave it. Like lore abuse is
done.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, we've pinnacled now. Yeah, I think it was really difficult. I think, David, I don't know if you want to comment on this as well, but when we started going through this and we were trying to think of these tactic levels, like that layer of abstraction we wanted to get to when we were going to cover all these things, we started off with some tactics that had like 20 or 30 different techniques in them. And there was like 2 of them that were really, really massive. And it's, one is the research, or has the train of thought gone down that specific path? That was a question we were having to ask ourselves. Or 2, had we got the wrong level from an abstraction perspective? I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that, or if that's just a little side story.
Yeah, I as I mentioned earlier, the taxonomies are just languages, right? And there's no necessarily correct way of abstracting the techniques from the prompts and then the tactics from the techniques, right? It really comes down to how you're going to use it, and so for us on the red team, like, I think we've captured some of the tactics. Group, and the way we capture the tactics is that we group certain like mechanisms that the techniques are using, right? And we capture those as families. So that's why lore abuse is capturing, all the techniques that somehow target that training data that the LLM has, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of back and forth about not just what level of abstraction to have, but what categories to have at all. And there's not necessarily a best way to categorize, right? It really comes down to, in some ways, it's a little subjective, right? It comes down to what your purposes are, what's going to work best for you. And, that's like, natural languages are like that too, right? Like English and Chinese are different. Even translations between them are not necessarily one-to-one. The concepts don't exactly map to each other. But that's okay, right? The different languages they've developed over time to what works for that particular population and that particular culture. And it's not like one language is better than the other. So it's kind of the same with taxonomies. And so I think we've tried to design ours to be useful to, well, not only red teamers, but also researchers, defenders, right? Threat intel people. So we've tried to make our taxonomy really, really flexible.
I'll jump in on the threat intel side of things. So obviously, yeah, my background is more threat intel than the other guys on the call. I love taxonomies. I speak to my boss quite often. He's probably watching. Yeah, I do. But yeah, I'm always bringing up different frameworks and different ways of like trying to conceptualize things from a threat intel perspective. It's super useful. If you think about like the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, right? That 7-phase, step by step. These are all the different phases of the kill chain that an attacker is going to go through in order to complete their actions and objectives. It's 2 things from my perspective. Like when I'm thinking about it in that perspective, I'm looking for the data that leads me from phase 1 to phase 2 or phase 2 to phase 3. So I have this story, I have this mental model of how an attack is going to evolve. Now, the context, the nuance changes every single attack you look at, but those phases give you the structured approach to start analyzing things. Same from a diamond model. It does it in a different way. Instead of looking at phasally, I'm going to look at it in terms of like adversary capability, infrastructure, and victim, and I can break my data points down into those different things and what I observe. And that's why I really love this taxonomy. I loved it from the moment, like it was an ill-formed thought that Jason, well, not ill-formed, just not very rounded. I'm gonna have to buy you a beer for that one. But yeah,
no, that's fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah. So when it was even that thing, I could see kind of where this was going to go. And from an Intel perspective, it's brilliant. One of the things that you struggle with on Intel is we're going to look at, you have like a group of analysts looking at different bits of evidence. So the evidence in this case is going to be IOCs. Thomas Rocker wrote a really good Medium blog around like IOCs being the next prompts being the next IOC, right? These are going to be the next indicator of compromise, but we need to share those prompts, or we need a way to summarize those prompts and then share what we've seen on them. But every analyst who looks at those prompts is going to take different things away from it. Like as a manual task of looking at a prompt and applying labels to it in attacks that we're seeing or in different data sets that we're seeing, those analysts have to choose what label to apply from this list of definitions that we've given them. And it's difficult to get consistency on that because everyone has different interpretations of it, which is one reason I love Intel. You can never be wrong. It's always your best assessment. But I love the fact that you have this difference of opinion. How do you get that consistency? Like internally, we talk about it. So we'll have different prompts and we'll discuss what those prompts look like and what labels we would apply, individuals on the team would apply, and explain why, and then try and build like a playbook up around what we're going to use in different situations. That's kind of how we're using it from the Intel team. Obviously, once you put that data into buckets, then what do you do with it? Well, it depends on your Intel requirements and what it is you're trying to satisfy for. But it gives us that ability to query back through the data, to look for those similarities in things that we've seen before when we start thinking about creating threat groups or like answering specific Intel requirements that come in. From that, like an Intel requirement might be around defensive strategies or mitigations and kind of where you might want to go with that. But yeah, that's how we're using it. It's kind of how we approach it from the Intel side of things. Slightly different, a little bit more loosey-goosey maybe. But yeah, talking about the mitigation side of things, David, do you want to get into that side?
Yeah, sure. So the next big project that we're going to be working on is a mitigations taxonomy to go along with this, right? So for each prompt engineering, adversarial prompt engineering technique, we want to have a classification of how to mitigate that type of attack. And so, and then, we want to build a whole taxonomy based on mitigations as well. And so that's just one way to extend this taxonomy. But to go like a little bit back to what you mentioned earlier, like the Lockheed cyber kill chain and other taxonomies such as MITRE Atlas, or things that really aren't taxonomies but are kind of LLM vulnerability lists, like the OWASP top 10 for LLMs. We don't see our taxonomy as competing with these. We see it as like compatible with these, like it can fit in. So MITRE Atlas has a technique called prompt injection, right? And our taxonomy can really just be a subtree under prompt injection, because really we have a taxonomy of prompt injection. We don't like to use the word prompt injection. We won't rather call it like adversarial prompt engineering, because prompt injection just has a whole bunch of, it's got a whole history and people disagree about exactly what that term means. So we just decided like, let's not use that term. But in spirit, we have a taxonomy of prompt injection here. And so to go along that, to pair with that, we want a taxonomy of mitigations. And we haven't started on that yet, but that is the next project we're working on. So that I think will help defenders. It will help red teamers, right? We would like to be able to, like recommend like here's a certain class of attacks that works against your LLM powered application, and here are the ways to mitigate against those attacks, right? And we can see other ways of building out our taxonomy too. So we can have like a risk taxonomy that can build into this. We can have a taxonomy based on like what kind of models are various techniques effective against, right? Because the techniques aren't effective against all models equally. So you can just kind of maybe start to see where we can build out from these smaller taxonomies. We can start building ontologies, and ontology is really, well, a taxonomy. Maybe step back just a little bit. A taxonomy is hierarchical, right? And an ontology builds upon taxonomies where you have non-hierarchical relationships between your objects. So that's the sort of thing that we envision building as we go towards the future.
I love the fact that you just gave everyone an insight into the conversations we have at midnight, and I'm like, dude, I'm too tired for this. I think when you started talking about like who's going to benefit from the mitigation side of things, the one thing you did miss out was the local coffee shop to me, because I'm going to need a lot of coffee while we're working through that one for sure. Okay, so we're getting there. We got sort of like 9-ish minutes left to go. It's going to give us plenty of time to talk about the contribution side of things. Like we've said, the examples we walked through, Jack, from like the red team perspective, and that breadth of coverage over objectives that people might want to see, that common language that can be used amongst the team, the breadth of research that Jason talked about, like, do we have any of these tactic buckets that are underrepresented in the techniques in there? Like, where are the wells that we can go and mine, right? From the use of it inside of Intel side of things, and informing defenders from what it is that we're seeing, and how you might go about trying to protect those things. Those are how we use it. Doesn't mean that's how you have to use it. And it's that whole emphasis. I'm going to say it, I'm going to sound like, I don't know, I'm begging or whatever. I'm not. But we really do we would really, really value like contributions. We've had a few already. This only went live like a week ago, I think. I can't remember the date. It was very sleep deprived when everything went live. But it went live last week. We've already had, I don't know, 3-4 people reach out to us to discuss certain things and start working together on certain things. We value contributions to this. We really, really want to make this a community-driven effort. Inside of the website that you can use to go and navigate through, there is a section under each of the techniques that we list out where we have contributors to it. There's a list for references that are going to go from reference archive papers or blog posts or YouTube channels, whatever, like however the data, people share that data with us. We want to make sure that everyone gets the credit like they deserve on this side of things. So please reach out to us. David's going to talk a little bit more around how we can kind of go and do that. It is not kind of super like process. Like this is going to be, you're going to be talking to us as we go through this process. That's the TLDR, but I'll let David do the real thing. Go for it.
Yeah, if you want to contribute, we have an email address. It's ape@hiddenlayer.com, ape@hiddenlayer.com. And we're looking for all kinds of contributions. We're looking for discussion, like questions that can open discussion. We're looking for contributions of new techniques, new tactics. We're looking at feedback for how our taxonomy is structured, whether we've like made a mistake in, maybe this particular technique you think is actually should be multiple techniques, distinct techniques. We're happy to engage in that kind of discussion. We are also interested in feedback about how to extend the taxonomy in various ways, or how to connect it up to other taxonomies. So taxonomies and ontologies, they kind of live and die by how useful they are to a community and adoption to a community. So again, we've tried to design our taxonomy with broad appeal in mind. We want people to use it. We want people to adopt it. It's just like a language. If you have a language that does not have any user base, it's a dead language and it's not useful, right? So we are hoping to be really in tune with the community at large. And yeah, we're looking to just open discussion. This is not like a product that we're trying to sell. This is something that we're trying to give the community. And we hope that we can build it together with the community. So please,
Absolutely.
Yeah, email us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we kind of might have missed it before. I don't know, Jason, if you want to dive in on it, but like one of the things that we were thinking of doing internally, either on the Intel team or like one of the other teams, was to look at like some of the public data sets, like the prompt data sets, and have a look and see kind of what their coverage is, right? Like, do you want to, is that enough of a lead in? It feels like it.
Yep. Caught it. Yeah. No, I think there was a blog that went out from some of our team members a couple weeks ago, a month ago, I forget exactly. Just kind of looking at some of the benchmark data sets that are used in the space of prompt injection. And if you look at these data sets, there's a couple of things that, if you spend some quality time with them, there's a couple of things that'll stand out. They're great data sets. They are what they were able to be at the time. But a lot of them are either captured from capture the flag events, which were great. That's an easy way to get a focus on a particular problem, but that makes the tasks, the objectives, and the tasks very narrow in terms of what they're actually capturing data on, and or they're very, I think the biggest capture the flag event of all is the jailbreak community going after the fully generic chatbots like ChatGPT or Gemini and so what you see is this like heavy weighting on those particular objectives and those particular effective techniques versus something that really is more broad, and so being able to quantify that is something that the taxonomy would help us do, right? In the sense of, okay, actually analyze the prompts and now they fit into these buckets, and what I feel pretty strongly we're going to see is like very high overrepresentation on certain tactics and techniques with really one or two objectives represented. Or at least inferred objectives. You can infer the objectives from a capture the flag because the objective is written in the capture the flag event. And so I think being able to expand out and be like, all right, we really don't have a lot of benchmark data in these other sort of areas is key.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of from like the scheduling perspective, that's kind of what we decided we were going to try and talk about. That we have had a few questions come in already. So we're going to flip over to the Q&A side of things. So since someone gave me the power and made me the moderator, I'm going to read them out and I'm going to pick someone to answer them. So Jack, we'll go with you first. What's the question? I think it is, do you have any personal favorite tactic or technique?
Yeah, I think one technique that is really interesting to me is chain of thought spoofing. So this, just to describe it a little bit briefly, is there are certain models that we can call reasoning models, reasoning LLMs, that before they generate their output tokens, just their response to a prompt, they'll generate some thinking tokens. DeepSeek R1 is an example of a reasoning model that will generate a chain of thought, a visible chain of thought. And so one technique is to provide in your prompt, in your adversarial prompt, a fake chain of thought. So you would enclose it in thinking tokens. You would pretend to be the chatbot thinking about something. And this can be leveraged to achieve all sorts of objectives. It's very widely applicable in many different scenarios. You can get the chatbot to think, oh, okay, the user is really nice, so I'm going to respond favorably to their query, even though I wouldn't normally to a user who's not so nice, or something like that. It's like the most basic example. But yeah, you'd be pretty surprised how effective you can be by simply spoofing, faking a chain of thought, even if you're not talking to a reasoning model. So that's the really interesting part to me, is that you don't have to be talking to a reasoning model, prompting a reasoning model, in order for this chain of thought spoofing technique to work. So yeah, I would say if I had to pick one, that would be my favorite technique, the one that's most interesting to me.
Awesome. Anyone else want to volunteer any of their favorite ones, or should we scooch along?
I will take credit for coming up with the name lore abuse. So that is my favorite tactic.
Lore abuse wins. Yeah, that from a tactic level, that absolutely wins. Okay, second question. I think we might have covered it slightly, but yeah, how do you decide whether to call something a tactic or a technique? David, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. It's the level. It's what we're abstracting from. So the techniques are abstracted adversarial methods from the prompts themselves, and then the tactics are abstracted sort of like families of where we have similarities between the techniques, right? So that's how we try to distinguish between the technique level and the tactic level. Techniques are abstractions on the prompts. Tactics are abstractions on the techniques. So there is a lot of back and forth when we're creating the taxonomy about, again, like what should be a tactic, what should be a technique. But that's kind of the rough rule that we lived by as we were designing and creating this taxonomy.
Yeah, probably a good time to jump in here and mention that in terms of usefulness, in terms of what's most useful in your specific use case, you can work at whatever level of abstraction makes the most sense in any given context. So if you're thinking to yourself, man, there's like 45 plus, almost 50 techniques in this taxonomy, that's a little too granular for my taste. I don't know if I would get much use out of getting that specific. You can work at the tactic level and abstract away the technique level. Or if you're someone who is a researcher or a red teamer, it often makes sense to get really granular and work at the technique level, or even at the annotations, pseudo sub-technique level that David was talking about earlier, getting even more specific. So that's one thing that we've designed into this taxonomy very purposefully, is the ability to work at whatever level of abstraction is most useful.
That works. Cool. All right, next question. think so here we go. So from Pedram, how do you apply taxonomy to a given attack? Is it a human process, or have you built some automation to ingest a prompt and extrude the taxonomy automatically? Subjective nature can be a killer. I kind of might have alluded to it. I say things and then forgot what I've said. From the Intel side of things, I can talk about that. I don't know about other parts of the business, but from the Intel side of things, it's a human endeavor right now. We are looking to try and get that consistency by making sure that on the team we are talking through how we would approach different prompts, like break up into so look at a prompt, this is how I'd go about it, and we have like discussions on the team. Someone else might have different ideas, then we have like this kind of way in which we're going to go to make sure we're being consistent over time, like catch back up again, just to make sure we're still on the same path, to see if anything's wandering off, and again, like to feed back into the taxonomy. But yeah, it can be a killer for sure. I'm sure there are other ways that people could go about it from using some sort of automation as well. But yeah, that's kind of how we're working on it on the Intel. Don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And so on the red team side, it is also a manual process. But we are looking at building, some hand-curated data sets so that, we could train a model, things like that. But to talk about that subjective nature of the problem, I think we're talking about prompts. And in this particular case, we're talking about textual prompts, right? Mostly in a natural language. Natural languages have ambiguity and vagueness inherent in them. So when we're trying to tag a prompt that is natural language, it's of course going to have some subjective nature as far as what kind of adversarial technique it's using, because there are borderline cases. And part of the taxonomy is it's not going to prescribe where the delineation of that border is, right? It should preserve that their natural language is vague, and it's going to have borderline cases. So I actually don't think the subjective nature is necessarily a bad thing, right? We do want to preserve that kind of subjective nature because language itself is subjective. But yeah, so we will have borderline cases, but that's not all the time. Most of the time, things going to fall squarely into one of the techniques or tactics or other.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of one of the things that I really love about this is the ambiguity of it. It's like, yeah, this is my approach to it, and then you can have discussions around it. It's like for everyone on the team, they know that I like to talk. Silence is like my worst enemy. It's like, oh, I'm going to fill the silence. So yeah, having conversations around the ambiguity on stuff is a lot of fun from my perspective.
It helps us get clearer on the nature of the concept.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that side of it for sure. Yeah.
It's probably worth pointing out as well that these things can be versioned and updated. There's nothing here written on a stone tablet that can't be changed, right? So if it seems ambiguous, that's a place to dig further, in my view.
The only thing written on a stone tablet is chain of thought spoofing.
Jack's not been letting that one go. All right. Next question. Let's have a look what we got. Cyrus, curious about the panel's thoughts on the differences between jailbreaking and prompt engineering. Smiley face. Jason, I'm going to give you this one.
My favorite word, jailbreaking. And I think so. I'm going to interpret this two different ways. I'm not sure if the questioner meant prompt engineering itself or if they meant prompt injection, the technique. It's a little unclear. So I'll talk about them both. But if you think about the term jailbreak for a second, first of all, I really don't like it, and I know that that's a controversial position, but to me, jailbreaking means getting into my iPhone in a way I'm not supposed to. It doesn't actually necessarily have anything to do with prompts, but the thing about jailbreaking as an objective, remember we're calling it an objective, is it's an attempt to bypass the alignment mechanisms that the model creator trained into the model through the combination of pre-training and post-training techniques. So these are things like, taboo subjects that the model's not supposed to talk about, things that it's sort of training the gap between what the model can do and what the model is willing to do. That's the key with jailbreaking. And it's independent of any applications that are using that model. It's just the model doesn't want to agree to do anything in that. Prompt engineering is about attempting to get the model to do what you want. So in that sense, they are like prompt engineering. If you're an attacker trying to bypass alignment, it is an engineering technique to try to get it to do that. Prompt injection, and we've had a lot of conversations about this. Prompt injection is a technique, right? It's a means by which you deliver a payload given the way in which language models are implemented, right? They're implemented with sort of trusted context and untrusted context, and you concatenate them. And so the name prompt injection originates from SQL injection, where you do exactly the same thing. And you're attempting to put untrusted and trusted things together into one context. And you're dependent on the model, and specifically its alignment training, where they create this idea of instruction hierarchy to correctly separate those two things. And they're not very good at that. I don't know. Anyone want to add to that? Hopefully
I think the short of it is that jailbreak is something that is like an outcome that happens, whereas prompt injection is the method. One of the methods that you can get that.
That's the key. It's not the only method. So
I think you did really well walking that tightrope. Well done. Okay. So next question we have is, how do you position your taxonomy against the NIST trustworthy and responsible AI, NIST AI, not going to read that bit, document? We had another question as well, as like asking about OWASP and Atlas and kind of why this is needed. So I'm guessing it's more like, how does it stack up against the other taxonomies? David, I know you've looked into these a bit more. Do you want to pick that one up,
the NIST, that particular NIST taxonomy has as categories in it direct and indirect prompt injection. And again, the way that we don't see our taxonomy as a competitor to these other taxonomies. We see it as being able to fit into them. It's just the more granular taxonomy than some of these other ones. And so our adversarial prompt engineering taxonomy can fit right under their direct or indirect prompt injection attack.
Yeah, and just to echo something I said earlier, if you don't need to get any more granular than just using the term, oh, that was a prompt injection or that was an indirect prompt injection for your use case, then that's fine. You don't even need to delve into the realm of our taxonomy. But often you do. Often you'll find that you need more specificity. You need clear language to describe what you're observing in prompt land, what you're observing with respect to the prompts. And that's where we think our taxonomy can plug in and hopefully be valuable.
Yeah, if you want to mitigate these attacks at a prompt level, you kind of need this more like granular classification of how the prompt injection works.
Sweet. Just conscious of the time. We're like 4 minutes to the top of the hour. Look at me being a moderator. Okay, so we're going to go one more question and then we'll just do the wrap up. Last question from Chase. Oh, sorry, the last question was from Steve. Never gave you credit. Chase, this one. What is the most effective way of using emoji with a lore attack? Any volunteers? I'm not going to pick anyone anymore. Lots of smiles on that I can see. I know everyone can just see me, but Jason's going.
You've got to first recognize emojis are a form of lore.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And so there's a lot of lore around emojis. There's also a lot of technical depth in terms of how emojis are implemented in Unicode. And so you can actually go both directions with that. You can do something more like an indirect, like a crop style lore based attack where you reference emojis and I don't know, you ask the model to think about emojis that represent a CBRN topic or something like that, right? And you can potentially get the model to deliver you some sort of taboo output in the form of emojis. But the flip side of that is that the way emojis are implemented in sort of Unicode is that there's a lot of implications on the tokenizers in terms of how they represent emojis. And an infamous example there is that you can use the flag emojis to represent a lot of ASCII characters because the Unicode represents them as two bytes, but the tokenizer will break that apart, and so then you end up essentially with these delineated ASCII characters with the modifier between each of them, and that allows you to speak to the model using flag emojis, but you're actually speaking to it in ASCII. So there's all kinds of directions you could go with that. I don't know.
I'd not heard that last one. That last one's very cool. I like that.
That last one we would probably categorize not as a lore attack, but more as like a token aware attack, like a tokenizer attack.
But it's a good point. I don't know if we covered this as well in this webcast as we should have, but these techniques are stackable. That's a really important point in the sense of a single prompt is likely to have multiple techniques that you can tag it with. So this is not a like find the one technique that this prompt represents. That's probably most effective modern prompts are going to have multiple.
Absolutely. That feels like a very good place to end the talky bit. Okay, so we're going to start wrapping up this. Thank you very much to everyone who has attended. Thank you very, very much to everyone who was on the call and contributing. So to Jason, to Jack, and to David. Two big shout outs as well to Ryan for putting this all on, making us look really good. The whole thing amazing. And Sam for organizing it all. This has been amazing. First one moderating. Maybe I'll be back. Who knows? We do have some links here where you can go and find extra resources around HiddenLayer, around the ape taxonomy itself. And with that, we've probably got a few seconds to spare before top of the hour, or 6 o'clock for me. So I'm going to say goodbye from me, and everyone's on screen, so we can all wave. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all.